Oh, that,
Okay, we're
there
live.
you have it. Okay. I CC him on my email to you. Oh, okay, got it. Thank you. Okay, all right, this is Senate Natural Resources and Energy, still April 30th, coming back from a break. And we are gonna be looking at a new draft of H 319. So welcome, Michael Grady, thank you. It's getting bigger, we're up to 54 pages, oh my gosh, okay, wow.
So the big addition was the reinsertion of the paint language,
Mhm.
which you saw in your previous drafts. But with that, there were some requests for tweaks from the industry. But before you get to those tweaks, I would like to note the new language that is on page 53. So there, I have to provide some context. The president issued an executive order that directed agencies to repeal what were called illegal regulations or unauthorized regulations. And he followed up with that with a memorandum on April 9th that directed all executive branch agencies to review the rules for legality under 10 recent watershed Supreme Court decisions. One with his Overbright, which overturned the Chevron doctrine, which many rules were based on in some form, the reasonable interpretation of ambiguous language. One was West Virginia versus EPA, which was a climate change air pollution case. Another was Sackett versus EPA, which related to the jurisdiction of the Federal Clean Water Act and how far the waters of the United States were to be regulated. And so those were the three, and there's a couple others that are important to environmental law, but those are the three big ones. And what the agency natural resources is concerned about is that if those rules or any of those rules, remember Chevron was used to be the basis of many executive branch rules. If the rules are repealed based on this memo, there are A&R rules that incorporate those rules by reference. For instance, I just did a little, just looking at some of the A&R rules this morning. The public water supply rule, the hazardous waste rule, the air pollution rules, they all incorporate by reference federal rules. And in fact, the hazardous waste rule has 353 references to the CFR in it for the Code of Federal Rules in it. So if there are repeals of those rules, it would substantially affect the ability of the agency to amend or even implement those programs. So that's what the language on page 53 of H 319 draft 2.1 addresses. It provides that any federal regulation incorporated by reference into an A&R rule as of January 1, 2025 shall continue in effect as an agency rule until January 1, 2028, when the agency rule is next amended, whichever is sooner, regardless of whether the federal regulation was later repealed or amended. A&R shall provide notice of any incorporated federal regulations by posting them on the A&R website, and that there is a concern that once these federal rules are repealed, that they are not going to be available. And so A&R will have the responsibilities to make any incorporated by reference rule available on the website, and nothing in the section shall prevent A&R from adopting or amending a rule pursuant to 3 VSA chapter 25, including through emergency remedy. So that's, it's a kind of quick fix to prevent state programs that rely on a corporation by reference from basically being unenforced.
Can I ask some questions?
Yes.
Why did you pick January 128 as the end date?
That was proposed by A&R, and I just went with what they proposed.
Okay, so depending on what happens, the legislature could extend that out,
Yes.
because it's not at the end of current president's term.
Hmm.
But I do wanna, I legally, I think this is a good protective measure to take. But legally as well, I don't know if these executive branch agencies will be able to repeal these rules, because the Federal Administrative Procedure Act has a very specific process to go through for repeal or an amendment of a rule, and it usually takes years. They are trying to use what is called the good cause exception in the Administrative Procedure Act, the Federal Administrative Procedure Act. It is like emergency rules in Vermont. It's when there is a necessity to go through rulemaking right away without notice and comment, without all the public procedure. They're trying to use that good cause exception. I expect that should be litigated as soon as one of the agencies tries to do that. So this is a good patch just in case it's needed, but it may not be needed.
Question about section C. Can you just explain like how section C interfaces with the rest of it? Like why might it otherwise prevent adopting or amending rules through emergency rulemaking?
So you could interpret A and B as basically freezing those rules in place, just freezing them, including the incorporated by reference authority. C is to say that the agency has all of its general rulemaking authority under 3 VSA chapter 25. That is the Administrative Procedure Act, VSA chapter 25. And that includes emergency rulemaking. The agency has another emergency rulemaking language provision floating around. I think it's currently being proposed in the Senate on 397. It's yet to find its vehicle in the House, but it's being looked at in the House as well. The question is, do you make it expansive to all agencies that might need it rather than just A&R? And that's a question, that's why it's in the GovOps committees. They're looking at the more expansive version that would allow, because emergency rulemaking usually is only available when there's an imminent threat of peril to the public health, the environment, or the economy, I think. And this would, what the language they're looking at would allow for a limited time emergency rulemaking when there is a repeal or a substantial change for revocation of an agency program that would prevent implementation of a program at the state level. So the agencies could go to emergency rulemaking. Those are available for 180 days, and then they could go full rulemaking after that. So that's this language is just to be clear that even though you're freezing those incorporated references and making them part of the law, regardless of their repeal, that A&R still will have rulemaking if they need it in order to implement a program. Or any agency, because that's the language is not focused on it.
So just making that
Yeah.
really clear, okay. Okay. And thank you for the note about the date, because I wonder if we might want to pick a different date. Yes.
1 day later.
Yeah.
Well, this
Oh,
is
even.
20
Oh, you're right.
The
Yeah.
other yearly.
Year and
Exactly,
yeah, so like February 29.
yeah. Is
So,
that the only thing that was added? To the bill?
From the
Last
last
time?
draft, yes.
so there was a question about the treasurer's date, is the treasurer had wanted a pushed out date. But I think that's in here, under section 25.
Yeah, their report goes from 2026 to 2027.
Yeah. Okay, so I know that had been a question, but I think it's there. I'll double check with them to make sure that that is how they're interpreting that as well. And we went through the paint stuff already,
Right.
so otherwise I think we're good with that. Do you, I heard that there were some potential tweaks to the language about paint. Do you wanna, if you feel comfortable, Michael, if you wanna lead us through that, or we do also have Allison, yeah, here to tell us about that if that's your preference. Either
Sure.
way,
So first, on page 3, this is in the covered household hazardous products. EPR program, remember, many of the changes are to interface the two programs so that there isn't duplicative requirements. The suggested change is page 3, line 10, that it shouldn't say paint related products. It should say paint products.
Okay.
And then, on.
is that gonna be true? There were a couple instances of paint related products, I thought.
Most of those were removed in the last draft.
Okay,
Sometimes there's terms like coating related product,
okay,
but that's a different term. But then in 66723, which is on page 22. The request is that it include language that OEM or industrial products are not part of coating related products. And that was in a version of the bill that was in the House. So I could clarify that OEM and industrial products are not part of coating related products.
I'm sorry, the what are not related? So I think I was turning to the page, so I think I missed.
So basically industrial products used for industrial applications are not going to be part of the definition of coating related product.
And is that because they're
They're handled most likely as universal waste or hazardous waste, and that they're going to be dealt with through those programs.
okay,
Moving on from there, 6673, which is on page 25, and actually page 26 of where the change would be. The request is on page 26, line 18, to retain the term post-consumer architectural paint in this section. Because this is the basically the phase-in plan. And so it's not going to address paint products yet. And so that's the change there. And then 6673I. That's in page 30, line 17. To strike the word before. And to replace or go back to, that's an editorial change from our editors.
Oh, we talked about this.
Yes,
I
I was-
remember.
So.
Yes, you go ahead.
GovOps in the miscellaneous technical corrections bill last year, this came up. Because. My spiel is that when I grew up, when we tell time in. Rural upstate New York, we say 5 minutes of 2 is 5 minutes before 2. So. But some people, the way the bill last year, the technical corrections bill, meant after. And so we made this change as a floor amendment. Because to change back to and keep it vague because there wasn't clear, so is it supposed to be before or after 30 days?
That's a question for the advocates. But that is why we used before, and that's why the editors changed.
Exactly, because they learned that from me.
So. So the request is to go back to of.
They want to go back to, but that reinstates the ambiguity.
Yeah. Well, Ms. Crowley, we have you here.
I know, I'm trying to find the email that explains the.
It says
Between,
delete before and retain of, because this is a list of items that we cannot necessarily inform them before they happen,
Right.
because they are not within the program's control.
So it should not have there.
I read about this after.
So that's why it's vague. Some people read it as before and some people read it as after, so we need to be clear about what it is.
Mhm.
So within
Of the
30
difference.
days after any change, if that's what you want.
Okay.
How does that stand with you?
we can put that in there and
Okay,
I think we all understand what we're trying to accomplish.
I mean,
It's so funny when I saw it before you even said it, I was like, oh, they're changing up to a before, that's great.
great. Okay,
Okay.
Can I ask a question?
yes, sure.
Are you done going through the
Yeah.
changes? Can we look at the section, I don't know where it is, about the fees that we discussed? And what, and how it ended up, I just remember there was a lot.
Page 37. 6681. So the current fees that retailers charge for architectural paint would be now listed in statute. So these are the current fees for architectural paint.
Mhm.
And then for all other paint products in section 11. There's going to be a fee report on page 39. For 715 A&R submits to finance and ways and means, or report recommending paint consumer PRPs be charged for paint products that are not architectural paint.
Okay, and then we would implement those fees next
You
session.
have to enact them by statute or authorize them to be charged.
Okay.
Mhm. And that's a normal procedure.
Yes. Fees, this is the normal procedure for fees, to submit them to the General Assembly and have the General Assembly.
Okay, great. Okay. Super, any other, was that the end of the list of this recommended changes?
Yeah. Yes.
Okay. Bless you. Any other thoughts? Okay. Super, okay, just to put it out to the committee, there's one other, just to say out loud, there are a couple other things that I had thought about putting in here. So one, we are gonna be talking about S-139. I think it is worth hearing about. I thought maybe we could put some of that in here, but I think it's gonna end up being more controversial than miscellaneous A&R bill, so, but we'll hear about it and we'll go from there. And then it's about plastic, so there's two parts. One is it would ban, plastic feedstock as going into incineration or pyrolysis, in the state of Vermont. But, the other part that I was thinking might be easier was a needs assessment for, looking at the possibility of a plastic, package in EPR. So we're getting some, feedback about, well, we'll hear more about that later, but I think it's not all, it's not all systems go.
Okay.
So there's that. The other thing, just to take us a little back in the time machine, remember the salt bill? So the House has done some work on the salt bill. It's in judiciary here. One of the possibilities is that if we could use this as a vehicle to try to marry those things. I think that is going to be a larger job that we can do in the time that we have to try to marry some judicial disagreements. So if that is the case, it may take a little bit longer. I would rather have a good program than a fast program, but there are some pieces of that I think are timely. Like we could take out there's like the salt shed study to see, there's a transportation amendment to see about where we're at with salt sheds. And look for funding for small municipalities in getting salt sheds covered. So since that's language that we have talked about here, and that would be a timely piece, that may be something that we could take out of that to move the ball forward this year on salts, while other judicial conversations continue, and see if they can land at a place of consensus. So just flagging that for folks as something that
So you're student, just salt shed piece.
yes,
Yeah.
yes, and if there's other parts that we want to pull out from that that can get the ball moving, open to that, but just wanted to put that out there as a possibility. Okay, so I'd also just flagging that.
Would you want that in the next version?
Yes, let's as long as there's no objections to that, let's work together to figure out what portions we can pull into to this draft.
There's now with the House proposed amendment to H 86. There's two ways to go about that solve. Theirs is effectively an inventory, identifying the state and municipal, but not private facilities, where they are, how many are covered, or uncovered that are within 100 yards, how many are uncovered that are outside of 100 yards, and then an estimate of the cost to cover and remove them. The Senate transportation, I'm not fully recollecting exactly what it was. It was more about focusing on how to provide financing for small municipalities to do cover or move. So I can provide both alternatives, so you can look at both in the next draft.
Okay, and if there's I think there may be some reason to do both, but let's talk more about that, and we'll come back with a little bit more language and make this bill even a little bit bigger. Okay, I think that is it for now. Any other questions about this? Comments, concerns? Okay, great. All right, thank you so much.
Or I will have schedules.
Yes. Oh, because you're here.
Yeah, right.
Yes, I think we should. I could use, can we take just like a 2-minute break? Is that okay? I need to switch my brain to do this thing. So let's take
You can do that.
2 minutes.
Okay, for that.
That's nice. Well, big time.
Okay,
They met after I was down there Friday, for that meeting. They met with the mayor after, the engineer after that meeting. Thank you.
So one of the things that they learned is that the railroad bounced the fare, and that's actually a pretty big thing.
big deal.
Yeah.
Well, we'll hear more about that tomorrow. All right, so this is Senate Natural Resources and Energy. Back to the break. All right, so we are looking at a new bill S-139, which is broadly speaking about plastics and what are we doing with all the plastics in our world right now? There's some places that burn them, that incinerate them. Maybe even places that pyrolyze them, that go through a gasification process. Do we want that in our states? And if we are looking at plastics in general, we have really successful EPR programs for other types of products. Some of the packaging can be toxic. It can be not recyclable, especially if it's layered. Multiple kinds of materials makes them really difficult to recycle. So this bill has two parts. The first part is looking at it doesn't establish an extended producer responsibility organization for packaging, but it looks at what is the need for that. So it would create a needs assessment for the management of packaging material and looks at a lot of different aspects of how plastic packaging is affecting us, including how much capacity do we have in our landfill? How can we make this packaging less toxic? Or just easier to deal with in general on the other end of its life. And there's a second section here which would prohibit the use of plastic as feedstock into processes like incineration or pyrolyzing. But there's a bunch of chemical processes here that are mentioned. And I'll just say, I think pyrolysis as a technology, I think is really interesting and promising as it's a process that you can use to make biochar, which I'm very interested in. I think that has a lot of potential. But if you put plastics, my understanding is that if you put plastics in as the feedstock into a pyrolysis process, you can get unknown, interesting, exotic things, chemicals out of that. And are those things that we want floating around in our environment in Vermont? And one of the I was going to say something more about that. I wanted to flag, just in case people, there are a lot of processes here that are named, but just to explain pyrolysis as a process, it is the heating up of material to extremely hot temperatures in the absence of oxygen, so it can't technically burn, but instead it starts to break apart. So that is broadly speaking what this bill does. So I'll turn it over to Michael. Go ahead.
This is Michael Gray with Legislative Council. As the chair previously noted, there are two parts to this bill. A needs assessment for management of packaging material and then prohibition on the use of plastic and certain specified chemical conversion technologies. We'll see on page 1, line 14, section 1 is the needs assessment. A&R will conduct it regarding the management of materials discarded or disposed from the use of packaging distributed in the state. There will be goals of the program and will determine the current status of reuse, recycling, and disposal in the state of plastic packaging. Identify barriers and opportunities to reduce the amount of material discarded and disposed of in the state, identify ways to increase the usability and recyclability of packaging material, identify ways to reduce toxicity and overall quantity of packaging material. And then in completing the needs assessment, the agency would be directed to answer certain questions. What is the total landfill capacity in the state? And how much of the capacity is expected to be used by the disposal of plastic waste? What is the quantity of packaging distributed and discarded in the state increasing or decreasing both as a whole and by material type? How does the amount of packaging distributed and discarded in the state compared to the average amount distributed and discarded regionally, nationally, and globally? Whether certain packaging materials are less expensive to landfill than process or recycle. How are producers and manufacturers of consumer goods currently involved in managing packaging waste in the state as in other jurisdictions? What are the recycling rates for packaging in the state by material, and whether the rates are improving or declining? What threats to public health or the environment are posed by chemical additives in packaging? Are certain types of packaging material easier to find process market and recycle? Are any types of packaging material currently able to be recycled in Vermont? What additives are found in plastic packaging? Maybe the threat to public health or impact recyclability? What are the end markets for recycled plastic? What's the demand for post-consumer recycled content? What opportunities exist for the creation of packaging material reuse and refill programs? How can packaging material be improved to enhance recyclability and end market demand? What consumer education is needed to reduce packaging waste, improve recyclability, reduce contamination, and promote reuse of refill? What are the opportunities and challenges of an EPR program that establish environmental standards for packaging? How can financial relief be provided to waste management districts and consumers through a packaging EPR program? And then last, does the A&R have the capacity to provide sufficient oversight of the packaging EPR program in the state? And what resources will be needed in order to provide sufficient oversight of that program? Then on page 4, line 5, sub C, A&R will give you that report on or before January 15, 2027. Part of the submission, they may recommend draft legislation to address the distribution, management, recycling, and reuse packaging in the state. Then page 4, line 11, sub D, there would be an appropriation in fiscal year 2026 of $250,000 to A&R for the purpose of contracting with an external organization to complete the packaging needs assessment. Then moving on to section 2. There is a let me think about how to do this. Yes, all right. There's a definition. Generally, this prohibits the use of plastic as a stock in chemical conversion technologies. And there's a definition of chemical conversion technologies and means using plastic inputs as fuel or fuel substitute for the general use of plastic in energy production. All right, let's stop there. Right now, waste is prohibited from being incinerated in Vermont. So any solid waste cannot be incinerated. But this isn't talking about plastic waste, because that's already banned from incineration combustion. So the question also becomes whether or not some of these processes are considered combustion, because they may not be, and maybe A&R needs to clarify that some of these fall under the ban of combustion as well. So that's kind of a threshold. This isn't about burning waste, it's about burning plastic as an input. But are some of these processes burning? Because when you turn to page 5 and you'll see the specific conversion technologies that are listed, gasification, that converts material to a synthetic gas. Acetyl pyrolysis is heating in the absence of oxygen that basically relates in a gas or biochar. Solvolysis is when you use a solvent to break down the material. That's not combustion. hydropyrolysis, when you use thermal decomposition in pursuit in presence of hydrogen. Methanolysis is when you use methanol to break down a product, and so methanol is not necessarily combustion. Glycolysis, using glucose to do the same breakdown. Enzymatic breakdown, enzymes used to break down solvent-based purification, solvent used to remove impurities. So these all don't clearly line up with the current ban on combustion. And therefore, you might want to request from ANR whether or not the current ban needs to be clarified. There's a definition of facility. A facility is basically any solid waste facility that ANR permits. Plastic is a general definition that we've used in other programs like the single-use plastic bill. I won't go through that if you don't mind. Recycling is any process in which materials are collected, separated, and processed and returned to the marketplace in the form of raw materials to make new products. And then you get the prohibition. Page 6, line 5 and 6, a person shall not use or operate chemical conversion technologies in the state. So shall not use one of those listed technologies to convert plastic inputs. And then a person shall not build, construct, establish, or operate any facility in the state that uses chemical conversion technologies. Prohibition applies to the modification and conversion of any existing certified solid waste facility into a facility that uses chemical conversion technology. And the state of Vermont shall not provide subsidies, grants, or any other financial or other incentives to support the development of facilities that use chemical conversion technologies for programs focused on chemical conversion technologies. I do have a question about the scope. Because right now, the prohibition on facilities is based on solid waste facilities. I am not skilled enough or know enough to know if these processes are used outside of solid waste facilities. Are they used in manufacturing, industrial facilities? Those facilities may not need a solid waste facility certification. And so if your intent is to ban all of these processes in the state, you might need to talk to ANR about the scope of the use of these processes and whether or not it needs to be not limited to solid waste facilities, because right now it's limited to solid waste.
Yes, go ahead.
So is there any reason on page 6, line 5 and 7, talk about a person shall not? Is there any specific reason why we use person rather than entity or?
So there's a default definition of person in Title 1 where there's where we define multiple different terms that are frequently used. The way the person is defined is any corporate entity, from the individual as the individual to a corporation, partnership, anything. It even includes municipalities, right? So it's everything that you can think of that could be operating in this.
Where was that coming up for you?
Page 5, 6.
Okay.
5 and 7.
Oh, okay, good. Yeah, good question. Something that we could talk about, yes.
I'm going to say I like what we're going to do here.
Great.
Stuff is bad. It's, by the way, it's a side note of getting a handle on total landfill capacity. This is directly, yes, it's something else I've been thinking about.
Yeah.
We got to figure out. Even we got
How much time we have?
You got one landfill in the state at X amount of time, so I'll just start that process. It's supposed to go volume water, and we've got to start really figuring out what we're doing next. And hopefully it starts with reducing what's going in. So this makes this whole thing is total sense to me.
Yes,
I agree with you, but the problem is, we don't produce anything in Vermont, except firewood and, wood products, but, we have no way of controlling what comes in. So the packaging that comes from China, if it gets here and we buy it and it's contaminated, it's just like, when we did away with the bag ban, the plastic bags. Everybody started sending me, reusable bags. I don't know if that's got PFAS in it, PFOAs. So are we getting something that's worse than what we had before? I agree that this is probably needed, but.
Well, we did the municipal responsibility changes last bill 2 years ago, was that 2 years ago, 1 year ago?
for what products?
All of the other products that we have, they all were,
Gosh, was that last year?
Which, where do we have?
Like the batteries,
Responsibility.
For covered household hazardous
Yeah.
products?
Yeah, that's what it was, yeah.
yeah,
So,
well, I'm sorry.
and it worked, and that actually does where we came from, then let's make them take responsibility for
Mhm,
plastic, it's just like ubiquitous, so.
right.
Yeah.
And so, yeah, to that point, maybe we can't control what comes in, but we can make the people who are selling those products here take responsibility for the end results. Right,
Then we'll go in the gantry.
well, and the other thing is that this, your question about, what can be done, this is a needs assessment, right? Like that would help to answer some of those questions, what could be done and what solutions exist. So anyway, that's some of the thinking in here. Anything that, you look like you wanna.
I just say, yeah, we can find a way to turn these plastics into secondary products or kilowatts or PTUs or whatever,
Mhm.
you know.
Yeah, so are you thinking like, change the products so that they are more acceptable for incineration or for,
Well, maybe-
using these processes
I
or?
mean, if you turn plastics into kilowatts, BTUs, or a secondary product that can be used, then.
Sure, like
it's
give
not
it,
right, though.
give it a different life.
Yeah,
Yeah.
exactly. That's
Mhm,
it.
mhm, right. Yeah, fair enough. Well, to be continued on this, I believe, again, we are running out of schedule, so,
I asked if Mr. Burns, but he didn't respond.
okay. Um. One possibility is that we could have you do a little introduction of your amendment, because we walked through it with Ellen this morning.
Yeah,
But also Ruth is not here, so
I've rearranged it a little bit,
Okay.
so it's probably better to do it in the morning if that would.
that's fine with me, that's fine. Okay, so we will take a break until 11:30, when hopefully we will have.
The California EV mandate.
Yeah.
I have split that out and I'm gonna offer that on the T-bill today
Oh, okay,
at third reading.
Okay.
Now, I don't know, I gotta contact Senator Westman. I don't know if that's an amendment that you wanna bring in here, or if that's something you think we need to bring in here.
I mean, I think it's relevant.
Okay, so then we could do that right now if you want.
Sure, because we did talk through it.
We don't have anything to post.
No, but it would already be, because you're just talking about the third instance of amendments. Is it the third? Maybe it's like it's a bunch of instances, the last. Oh, you gotta go. Well, you're gonna be presenting this today anyway.
At third, yeah.
So, we might as well. Even though you have to go, unfortunately. Okay, sounds good.
Take your notes for it.
Right, let me get back to that. Okay, so that is section. The fourth instance of amendment through the end, yeah?
I'm gonna, you know what I'm gonna do, I'm gonna send it to you right now. And so you can have it.
Okay. Well, we printed it out from this.
But it's a little different.
Oh, it is a little bit.
Yeah, so let me, just trying to figure out who the name of the transportation team chair is.
The committee assistant over there? Oh, Megan?
Megan, Cal, Asala.
It's Canella.
Yeah, thank you. Just point of. So tomorrow, no, Senator Beck at 9:30.
Oh, no, because we should still talk through the other,
Okay, fine.
The other one.
the other.
Okay,
Yeah.
that's fine.
Yeah.
Yeah, thank you, I have to change it.
No, but yeah, no problem.
Or just set that
That's
to.
right.
Yes.
She ever was like,
You know what, I'll send it to.
Judy, you got the link out, you can watch section.
You guys send it to me, is it long? I think I can print it right here.
No, it's not long at all.
Okay,
It's very short.
alright,
I sent it to the rest of the committee members too,
okay.
and Senator Westman and Megan, she
Megan,
sent it
yeah.
here as well.
And me,
Yeah, I think,
yeah, it's just slow.
yeah. Yeah, it should be on the way to. Let's have.
So did you email that new version to them?
It's just slow, I'm not.
I did, yeah,
Okay.
yeah.
Yeah, weird.
Oh, there it is. Oh, so it's just,
Just the chat.
it's just that last part. It's not the whole rest of it.
That's right.
Okay.
I'm just looking for. The title. Wondering on, it's right. Be sure that's good.
Like what chapter it applies to?
Yeah,
Is that,
chapter 40, but section 21 maybe. But it's not, yes, it's insane.
thank you. So I think it's 10. Some traffic. The previous section references 10 BSA,
It's a 10.
it might be in 10. Then section, it's not in 10.
Chapter 21 is tourist information services under check under title 10.
Okay, I don't know then. You're just waiting to figure out that bit of information. before-
Yeah.
Okay.
So, yeah, what this does, I believe what this does is it repeals the revolve, I have to comply with the California 35%. In that 2026 model.
Mhm.
So if we remove that, comply.
Sure, and do you have a sense of what the alternative is? If not California, then what? And I say that knowing,
Well-
kind of talk about that.
Yeah, no, this doesn't prescribe
Mhm.
any standard, it just says that we're not going to do 35%.
Mm.
If somebody wanted to propose something very specific, that would probably require a complete committee process to pick a number that is more suited to what we're doing right now.
So
So I know how that will go.
unfortunately, we don't have that option, right? Like the choices are either we go with the federal rules or we go with California's rules, and there's no space. We talked about this morning with Ellen.
Yeah, so,
There's unfortunately no space for creativity
Right.
in that.
so if we're not following the 35%, we would follow the federal.
Exactly, it would be the federal.
And what did Ellen tell you, their name?
I think there was no mandate. It was no mandate. So it's either, yeah.
0 or 35.
Yeah, 0 or 35, right? Like these are our choices,
And
yeah,
I'm not gonna try to, in this amendment,
yeah.
I'm not going to try to say what the number should be,
Mhm.
because one, I know how that's gonna go.
Yeah.
We did go through the community process and that whole thing.
Yeah.
But if the, in the last 4 weeks we're here and our time, if we wanted to, come up with our own,
Mhm.
goal that we wanna hit, I think we did 12% last year.
Mhm.
If we wanted to pick a different goal that we thought was achievable, I would be all for that,
Mhm.
but I know 35 is.
Again, I'm not sure, it's not clear to me that we can even choose our, that's
We
even an
can.
option for
Yeah,
us.
we can,
Yeah, so
Yeah.
that's my understanding is that we are.
so, we're well above zero, we're well above zero,
Yeah.
but 35 is not, we're not there yet.
Mhm. Well, and you're familiar with how this program works with the credits and banking credits and all that?
As far as the purchase,
As for dealers in terms of being able to have basically credit towards that percentage ahead of time?
no,
Oh, okay, because as part of because we had that joint hearing with transportation. Pointing over there because it was in room 11, but so, because particularly because of the way this law was set up, there are ways to bank, credits for this so that it's not sort of like an all or nothing, there can be sort of a ramp to it. And just so you're aware, I mean, in that meeting, the administration, said that particularly because of the way that it was structured, that the clean cars and trucks, rule was achievable. And I was like, really? Achievable? You think it's achievable? They're like, yes, it's achievable. So,
the auto dealers aren't agreeable to that.
Yeah, that's-
Opinion.
yes, well, it would not be the first time that the regulated, folks, object, so.
I mean, yeah, people can vote for 35 then, I guess.
Okay,
Yeah.
I just wanna make sure that you were aware at least of that, because I think you missed that joint hearing, so.
Yeah, well, I mean,
It'd be
people
good
think,
to-
if people think that 35 is achievable, given the rules that we have, then they
Right.
can vote.
Given the slack
They
of
can vote
the
no on
banking.
that. Yeah,
Yeah,
yeah.
are you gonna make that clear that that's a part of, the existing rules?
I won't go into detail, I just say, if you think that they can hit 35, given the rules that they have in front of them, then go ahead and vote no. If you don't think that's true, you can vote yes. See where that goes, I mean.
All right,
So moving down.
so there's
You stuck it on to,
Senator Becker changing his plan a little bit.
Okay,
Put it on, as an amendment, a potential amendment to the transportation bill for today.
Just the California EVPs.
okay,
And so, yes, just this bit. So is your intention then with the potential amendment to the budget? It would now not have the
That's right, it would be,
or
yeah,
through the 7th. The 4th through the 7th amendments.
yeah, and I can send that as well.
Okay.
I can do everything. Let's make sure it's all, yeah, that's everything.
We figured since he was gonna be offering it today and we had a little downtime, we might as well talk about it.
Yeah, sure,
Yeah.
this is. Can you just say what it's
So it's just the last. It's just the 7th instance of amendment that we talked about this morning.
Okay,
So it's just repealing, so it doesn't change the authority to adopt rules. It just repeals that advanced clean cars 2 and advanced clean trucks. Just.
it just repeals those, but they can still make.
Right.
And adopt other California requirements or not,
That's my understanding, it'd just be narrow to that.
Mhm.
okay,
And we've talked about what the alternative is. Just before you got here.
okay,
And that there's not space for creativity and choosing around.
Vermontizing it.
Yeah, right. Yeah,
And I just sent you that, the 493 and then they'll offer more,
Okay,
which is the California EV that's not within that.
any further questions for Senator Becca? Oh, also, Senator Hardy, just to, so you know, we also talked about how in that joint hearing, the administration described clean cars and trucks as achievable. Particularly because it's not a hard 35, there's ways to bank credits and sort of smooth that out.
right, that was a. Feels like we're thinking about one time.
Yeah. Does feel like a long time ago that we talked about that, yeah. Just kidding. So, okay, there we are. Thank you. Good to have that ahead of time.
Did you go over to transportation with us yet? Okay.
I imagine, are you gonna be whisked out of here to make that presentation to them?
I would think so at some point.
Okay. Okay, great. Well, so with that, for now, actually, do you happen to know where Seth went? Or is it-
I don't know where he
You
went.
don't know where he went either, because it would be. Well, we'll be okay. All right, so, we're gonna transition back to S-139, this bill about. A needs assessment for packaging materials and then. Also a potential prohibition on chemical conversion technologies. Thinking about it in the context of combustion and pyrolysis and all these other chemical processes that might leave us with some exotic chemicals in our environment. So we have Mr. Burns, welcome.
Thank you very much, Madam Chair and members of the committee. For the record, my name is Paul Burns. I'm the Executive Director of VPIR, Vermont Public Interest Research Group. My first time testifying before this committee this year. So pleased to be here. I know you've probably heard some from my colleague, Julie Walsh, on energy and climate matters. As I think you all know, VPIR works on a broad range of issues, and including in that is a number of other issues that have come up before this committee over the many years, including waste issues and toxics, environmental health matters. So today I am before you to talk some about the issue of packaging, excessive packaging, primary focus on plastic packaging. And I would say this is an area though we may have disagreements on other things, I think there's an opportunity for broad agreement. I mean, almost everybody I talk with thinks that they are exposed to too much, particularly single-use plastic waste, and it is a problem that is getting far worse, year over year. And it's received quite a lot of attention in recent years. This was, gosh, it was at least 5 or 6 years ago. National Geographic came out with an edition on this topic. And the graphic here is showing a plastic bag, obviously in ocean, but what we know about is just the tip of the iceberg. Was the kind of suggestion there. And I'll go through some of the statistics that we know about, but it's a significant problem. It's a problem of waste. There are human health implications for wildlife as well. There are toxic issues involved with a lot of these plastics and other forms of packaging, and then there are climate implications also. And again, something that's getting much worse over time. I will say that just last November, we joined in producing a small little pamphlet report to help folks understand how they might avoid plastics in the holiday season. So this came out just before Thanksgiving last year. And in this, we go through, again, a description of some of the issues and problems, all the different toxic chemicals that may be found in plastic packaging, for instance, which was surprising to many people. And then an identification of a number of different products, some of which are packaging, but there are other things here too that were somewhat surprising. And we'll make a copy of this available or links for the committee as well. One of the things that struck us, though, in the area of packaging was even food packaging. When you're out buying your items for your Thanksgiving meal or any meal, you can go to one or more grocery stores just a few miles from where we are sitting and find individually wrapped potatoes in plastic.
Really?
Which is, it's really extraordinary and unnecessary. Some that I picked up to the press conference was 3 potatoes, just regular potato, russet potatoes, in 3 together, wrapped in plastic on a black plastic tray. Which makes it even a little bit worse. I mean, as many of you know, plastic cannot be recycled. They don't want it. The plastic wrap cannot be recycled. You don't ever put that in your blue bin. It kind of comes up to work at the material recovery facility. They don't want either of these things. And the black plastic itself may have been linked to, some studies show, linked to certain kinds of toxic chemicals that come from flame retardants, brominated flame retardants in particular. And when things like computers or other electronics are sent for recycling, a lot of those are treated with toxic flame retardants. They perform a function for your electronics, but you do not want it in your food packaging material. And we don't, in this country, do a great job of necessarily separating those things out. So again, they don't want those things in their blue bins here in Vermont. And it's just examples like that were somewhat eye-opening, and again, around which I think we have very broad, if not universal, agreement that let's not use single-use plastic material to package things when it is unnecessary. And of course, Vermont does have a hierarchy for waste management that prioritizes reduction, recycling, and reuse ahead of any kind of disposal method. And where we've certainly made important strides in the area of recycling, we haven't done nearly enough, I would argue, in the areas of reduction and reuse. And this seems like quintessentially kind of a Vermont issue. I mean, why don't we make products that are better, that last longer, that can be repaired, even repaired ourselves, right? A lot of these issues come up somewhat regularly in this building, and isn't that better? So we're sending less to the landfill. As you all know, we have just one remaining landfill in the state. It is filling up more rapidly than we would want. And why not send less? Why not generate less unnecessary material? And a lot of that, when we're talking about packaging, is material that is used just once for a few minutes. And in the case of plastics, probably reminding you of something you already know, it doesn't break down. It doesn't biodegrade in the environment. And so we talk about it being around for hundreds or even 1,000 years, if the pilgrims could come over with a, I don't know, Dunkin' cup for their coffee, the cup would still be here somewhere, in some form. What does happen over time is that depending on where that plastic, is, it may break up into smaller bits of plastic, ultimately known as microplastics. And those are, very small grain, bits of plastic. The size of a grain of sand or smaller, generally speaking, is what we think of as microplastics. And the even smaller encompasses a lot of things that are now out in our environment. I'll talk a little about that, but it's found virtually everywhere in the world now, including in each of our bodies, almost certainly. And so that kind of by way of just introduction or setting the stage here, our goal in this area is to see if there are reasonable state policies that can be taken that push back, give a little more responsibility, require manufacturers to take more responsibility for their products, and particularly their packaging, and encourage them to make packaging out of materials that can be reduced in quantity or reused whenever possible, and moving them away from the ever increasing amount of single-use plastics in this area. And again, that benefits most people, I think, in a lot of ways, including just financially, fiscally. We all pay to have our waste and recycling picked up at the curb. It goes to a landfill. As that landfill again fills up, you got to look for other uses of that. These are going to be taxpayer or consumer expenses. And for too long, the people who make this stuff have gotten away with just making it and putting it out into the world and not bearing any of the responsibility, financial or otherwise, for what happens to that. And I think you're seeing a growing interest in the area of so-called extended producer responsibility. Vermont has EPR, extended producer responsibility programs, in a number of different areas, including just last year when the legislature passed EPR for household hazardous waste, for instance, but you can think of it for mercury light bulbs and thermostats and electronics and I don't know, half a dozen other items that we have decided as a matter of public policy, we want to have the manufacturers take more responsibility for those materials. So I'll run through some additional information here and a kind of recommendation and where we might go. That's okay with you, Madam Chair.
Oh, yes, please.
So from 1950 through at least 2022, there was an estimate of 9.1 billion tons of plastic generated in the world. Less than 10% of that has ever been recycled. And again, since it doesn't break down that quickly, it's all out there in the world somewhere. By the end of this year, estimates suggest that for every 3 tons of fish in our oceans, there will be 1 ton of plastic waste. That's extraordinary. Much of the plastic, about 80% of it, ends up being landfill. Again, in a landfill, it may take even longer to break down, so that's where your plastic cup could literally be there in 500 years. Single-use items, including paper, various forms of plastic and packaging, make up about 1/3 of Vermont's landfill. All landfills, of course, eventually leak, and what they leak depends on what is in the landfill. But some of it can be quite toxic. If it's not properly contained, this can contaminate surrounding soil and waterways. Again, I think you know a lot about that, probably heard some about that. Questions as our landfill fills up are, do we expand it further? Do we ship waste to another state? Or do we finally try to move away from generating so much waste to begin with? When we think about just a couple of other stats on marine life, plastics again, plastic makes up 80% of all marine debris, from surface waters to deep sea sediments. Most debris in the ocean will last at least for 500 years or more, never biodegrades. An estimated 100 marine animals are killed each year from plastic pollution. A New York Times story earlier this year found that microplastics had even been found in dolphins' breath. I don't know how that study was conducted, but I can get to the citation for that. Toxics. So waste is an issue. Toxics is a separate but related issue. Certain kinds of plastic are toxic by their nature, including polystyrene and polyvinyl chloride, PVC, for instance. Toxic additives may also be added to make plastic flexible, sturdy, colored, or heat resistant. These include plasticizers, stabilizers, pigments, and flame retardants. A lot of these additives are endocrine disruptors, can affect your hormone system. They mimic or interfere with the body's hormones, and that is, again, known as the endocrine system. Bisphenol A, or BPA, is a common endocrine disrupting chemical found in shatterproof plastics, for instance. Phthalates, another common endocrine disruptor found in flexible vinyl, PVC. Perfluorinated or PFAS compounds found in various kinds of plastics. And again, the brominated flame retardants often found in electronics and other commonly used black plastics. A major way these get into our system or environment is again through microplastics. They can accumulate along the food chain, be incorporated during the food production process, or be released from plastic food packaging, as I mentioned. A recent study in Nature magazine, this just came out in February of this year, got a lot of attention. It analyzed tissue samples from 47 human cadavers. And it found that the plastic in the brain tissue contained roughly 10 times more microplastics than found in liver or kidney tissue in these cadavers. The amount of microplastic content in the brain averaged 4,800 micrograms per gram. What does that mean? It's about the amount of a plastic spoon. This is the average amount of plastic found in 47 cadavers. Now, you may be wondering, well, tell me more. I'm going to tell you a little bit more about that. Plastic concentrations in these decedent tissues in the cadavers were not influenced by age, sex, race, ethnicity, or cause of death. The time of death varied, it was between 2016 and 2024. That was a significant factor. With increasing concentrations over time in both the liver and brain samples. And finally, even greater accumulation of microplastics was observed in a cohort of the brains of those with documented dementia diagnoses. This is a fascinating study. It is, we need more study, of course, but fascinating in a number of ways. It's just that there is that quantity of microplastics in our bodies, in our brains, may be linked to dementia. There are real and legitimate reasons to be concerned about this and to try to reduce, taking a precautionary approach then and saying, let's try to reduce the amount that's out there. Finally, in the area of climate change, climate emissions are, of course, released in a number of ways throughout the process involved in creating and using plastic. Plastic used to be made from toxic chemicals and oil. But now, most plastics are made from chemicals and ethane, a byproduct of the hydraulic fracturing or fracking process. New facilities called ethylene cracker plants are churning out plastics and have become themselves super emitters of greenhouse gases and other air toxins. Okay, so what have we done? Well, again, I want to compliment you and your predecessors for taking some important steps already. The state, for instance, passed a ban on a number of single-use plastics in 2019. That banned single-use grocery bags, plastic drink stirrers, polystyrene food service products, and made plastic straws available only upon request. So I know that's not being followed 100% of the time in my experience. But in the area of plastic bags, so if you ban something entirely, it's easier to see the progress. And since that law was passed, we estimate that Vermonters have avoided using, when we wrote this earlier this year, 475 million throwaway plastic bags have been avoided since that law took effect. And there were folks who at the time argued this is going to cause great problems in our society and our culture, and people are not going to remember or want to bring bags into the grocery store. costs are gonna go through the roof and so forth. We have seen none of those, negative effects. I sometimes ask grocery clerk, if anybody raised this as an issue? No, it's not raised. It's have people made that transition. We may feel we have too many reusable plastic or, reusable bags, grocery bags now, but, you know, you keep them in your car, what have you. People have made that transition without any great effort and saving, again, roughly 500 million plastic bags that otherwise would have been created, used, even if disposed of properly. The number of them you can see in the trees, you still see those occasionally, but it's less frequent than it used to be, because there's just fewer of them out there in use.
I saw one just the other day going around, and I was like, wow.
Where'd they come from? How they get to
New Hampshire.
No, it's well, I mean, there are some out there, but it's certainly, it is just an example right here. So you can't possibly do it. We couldn't do that culturally, but we wouldn't go for it. And people can make that transition. Another item in this area, the bottle bill, of course, this has been the law of the land in Vermont since 1972, broadly supported. The last poll that we did about 4 years ago on this found that 80% of Vermonters support the bottle bill, which covers, for the most part, carbonated beverages and alcoholic beverages. More than 53 in the 53 years or so that it's been in existence, more than 10 billion beverage containers have been recycled through Vermont's bottle bill program. And again, we get somewhere on the order of 75% of the cans and bottles that are covered by the bottle bill are brought back for deposit and recycling. Virtually all of them are recycled into something else. Often a bottle gets recycled into a bottle again. You save energy. There are reduced air and water pollution consequences of turning a bottle into another bottle, as opposed to using virgin materials to create that same bottle. So all sorts of benefits to that. It is not part of this proposal. Over time, we would love to see that updated. As there's almost every other state, the bottle program has done. Our bottle bill right now covers about 46% of the beverages sold in the state. Maine's bottle bill program covers more than 90% of the beverages sold in that state, just as an example. That is not part of the proposal here. I will just say, just moving forward, as I mentioned, we'd like to see something like an EPR program for packaging, and again, particularly focusing on those plastics. This is at a time when consumers are not asking for more plastics, but they have little choice. It is virtually impossible to avoid plastics in our daily lives, no matter how hard we might try. That is just the reality of the situation. There are estimates that there will be a doubling of plastic production in the US over the next 20 years. Again, a lot of that's tied to fracking and plastics coming from that. The only way to change that, I think, is if places like Vermont adopt new strong policies to reduce the production and use of, and then ultimately the disposal of plastics. We need packaging to be reduced and redesigned. So there are a number of ideas that would be part of an EPR program for packaging that we support. We can submit more information on this to the committee as well, but couple of key ones. First, establishing standards, environmental standards for packaging, similar to fuel efficiency standards for cars, for instance, or appliances that we have seen. We would like to see 50% packaging reduction over a period of time. In New York State, they're looking at a bill right now that would achieve that over 10 years, for instance. That can be achieved either by elimination or switching to reuse or refill systems. And then you'd like to see a recycling rate for that which remains, 70% recycling rate over a 10 or 12 year period. These are steps that we think could have a significant impact on what manufacturers are using, how they are packaging products, if the state of Vermont makes a requirement like this. We also want to see a reduction in toxics in packaging. We've talked about some of the chemicals used in packaging, and we can imagine a requirement to simply reduce the use of at least certain of these toxic chemicals in packaging. That is a doable thing. We have not always had these toxic chemicals surrounding our products. And it is particularly important, I would say, for food contact packaging materials. That you want to get the toxics out of there, like PFAS or lead or mercury, etc. I will note that California has passed legislation along these lines. The governor of California has recently required a reconsideration of some of those requirements. I want to be honest with you. I think we should take a look at that. That's one of the things that should be examined as Vermont goes forward. The bill that we are talking about today is a study. It is not an immediate step toward requiring EPR or reducing the quantity of material or taking toxics out of the same. We should look at this. How could Vermont move forward? I am hoping that New York State legislators will pass a bill this year. It is under a very serious consideration there that is quite ambitious in the areas that we're talking about, of reduction and promoting recycling, promoting reduction, and getting rid of toxics. So it could be an excellent model for us. And again, if New York does it, so much better. I'd love to see New York go first in this, and we could no doubt learn a lot from that process. And so I think I like the idea of a study, a review of what's happened in other places, other states, maybe other countries. What could we imagine happening in a place like Vermont with a reuse program, for instance? There are some places on the west coast of Oregon, for instance, that are moving toward at least investigating reuse. Some of the craft breweries there reusing bottles. We used to, glass bottles used to be reused all the time. We don't have the infrastructure to just snap our fingers and make that happen here. Come on, I understand that, of course, but it'll never happen unless you're purposeful about it, intentional about saying we don't like the direction that we're heading. Maybe we go back to the former idea and do it in a different way, a better way. Let's take advantage of all the information and expertise that is out there. We've had good conversations with the Agency of Natural Resources over this. I know that from a resource perspective, they are stretched, doing a lot of good things, and we'll be investigating a lot of different issues in this off season. So I don't know what their capacity is. I will certainly let A&R speak for themselves on that topic. But again, I understand we've had what I would say are very productive conversations about the issue. I expect most people around the table, there's broad agreement that it would be nice if we could move in this direction. And the question is what's the right fit for Vermont? What are the elements that we could do? How fast could we do it? What are the numbers, etc.? And if we can learn from other states, I'd like to do that. If it can't happen as a full-blown study in this, between now and next January, I'd like to think that at least useful and productive conversations could continue. And we, certainly for our part at VPIRG, would be very happy to continue being part of that process. This is something that will have to come back before this committee, because I guess what I'm suggesting. And I don't think we can count on industry to do it on their own. I know we can't count on the federal government to do anything useful in this area. And that it's just not, and that is not going to be leadership along those lines for quite a while. And so states, it doesn't mean that nothing useful can be done though, particularly if some of the larger states are making some progress in this area. I think that we can and should be part of that effort. And again, Vermont already has been in addressing some of the single-use plastics in the way that we have. So there's a tradition, broadly supported. We'd love to see more work in that area. And finally, I will just say, there are alternatives to a lot of these things that are so much better. We at our press conference, we used this, we ordered some photographs on there are services now, the frame photographs and so forth. They give you this giant box, 4 times larger than it needs to be, and it's just filled with bubble wrap, for your 3 frame photographs or what have you. And on the day that we received that, we also received a package from a Vermont business. Who said, I heard you say something about, I think we put something on social media. I heard you say something about plastic packaging and how awful that is. And I wanted to make you aware of an alternative that we have. It was produced, I think it's in hardware, silver curl. And this is Vermont made, this is wood. And I understand it works really well. It could be kindling. It could certainly be packaging. something that would keep your products safely, in a bed of nice Vermont wood chip material for your. Yes, I mean, who wouldn't rather receive a product, packaged in this than, plastic, which, most. Wherever it ends up, it's not gonna be good. And I just thought, it was serendipitous that it received just, like the day before the press conference that we did, we brought it out and showed it, and again, it's a Vermont product. There are others like this around, I'm sure. And it is just but one example of how we can, you don't have to go without the packaging. You don't have to have things break when you're sending it, you can package it in something else. And of course, we used to get the styrofoam peanuts, for packaging material. There was enough pushback to that they largely, nearly everybody has stopped using that kind of material. So they are responsive over time, but sometimes it takes a push. That's what we're encouraging you to consider, and I appreciate the opportunity to test it.
Thank you. Yes.
Couple things. I think, and Terry, Senator Williams, we did a bill in health and welfare last year that did study some of these things when it came to, I believe, food packaging. And they were some of the same issues, but really focused on the sort of health and welfare kind of aspect of it. I think you testified on that bill. Do you know what the status of that is?
Actually, Senator, it's a good reminder, and I feel like I need to check on what this.
Yeah.
So that.
That's 25.
Was it?
Well, that was the PFAS legislation that eliminated, a number of uses of PFAS, and there was a study that the Agency of Natural Resources did in conjunction with the Health Department and the Attorney General's office.
Exactly, and it was supposed to be much more, how do we do this from a broader perspective and not chemical by chemical kind of thing, or toxin by toxin. Matt Chapman was involved.
That is, and it remained very involved in this, and so a bill was taken up in the House Environment Committee and passed, and it is now in Health and Welfare again.
A new bill?
A new bill.
Oh, because this was last year that we passed this.
Yes, but it was a study that came back, so Matt Chapman did his work, came back with the study and offered some suggestions, recommendations.
Okay.
They were not moving immediately toward the much broader focus on all consumer products and getting PFAS out of all consumer products, which was one idea contained in that. Instead, it's a more narrow focus on PFAS in dental floss, PFAS in cleaning products and fluorinated containers. And I think everybody understands we really need to take, as Senator Lyons said last week, we should be taking this out of everything. I mean, it is a really terrible toxin and it is everywhere now, and we should remove it. So in that sense, I'm well aware of the study. I think there's more work to be done to kind of get to that next stage of a broader, more comprehensive approach.
Yeah.
But
This
I believe
one-off approach is so frustrating.
that's right. I believe you'll have a chance to do something more on certain items soon.
But I thought there was a thing specifically about packaging as related to food, but I don't remember it.
It was in that broader
Okay.
focus as well. Yes.
And just a couple things so I lived in Germany for a year and they have extensive EPR programs that are completely cover packaging, and their packaging is much less extensive. I mean, you can see it just going to the store there and the way things that are packaged, because the industry is required to pay for the disposal or recycling of everything. So of course, they want to produce less waste so that it's less expensive for them to deal with it. So they do work well when you have a good one. And then I had another question for you. Oh, I wonder if you've heard your story about the I can't get this image out of my head, ironically, of the like plastic spoon amount of plastics in our brain. So I just see like a brain with a plastic spoon stuck in it. This seems like actually an issue that our kind of nutty Secretary of Health and Human Services at the federal level might actually the game to work on. And I'm wondering if you have had any conversations with federal counterparts, because, you know, he's all about sort of against toxins in your brain kind of thing. It seems like this might be something we could find some mutual common ground on. I wondered if you'd had any conversations about it.
I would, I know that Judith Enck, who is the head of an organization called Beyond Plastics and based out of Bennington College. And is a former EPA Region 2 administrator, EPA administrator.
Yeah.
Testified in Congress recently about this need for this kind of action. I haven't heard, you're right, that this would be in line with some of the concerns that we've heard expressed by Robert Kennedy Jr. I don't know how far we could expect that to go. There is another area that we have worked on here in Vermont related to food dyes, for instance.
Yeah.
Heard something recently from him on that. But even there, while he said these 8 food dyes were being banned, it's not really banning any of them. It's he's seeking voluntary action on the part. That didn't come through in many of the stories.
Yeah.
It's not the headline from him on that, but he's
A voluntary ban?
he's asking for them voluntarily, and some large food manufacturers already said, no, we're not going to do that, so we'll see what happens. And again, you know, from my perspective, it's hard to say you're making America healthy again while you cut access to.
No. Absolutely. You and I agree on that, but I was just like, is there a common ground?
Yes, we
on
want-
the plastic food in your brain?
I do want to look for opportunity in this case. Even more so than food dyes, the manufacturers here are it is the oil petroleum industry.
Yeah.
And that may be a more challenging lift, I guess I would say.
Yeah.
Senator Williams, you had a question?
So just a comment, so that S-25 bill, remember we exempted outdoor gear?
Right.
Until 2027 because of the negative vortex, which had also included chemicals, but. You know, one advantage of being 73 and there are not many, is that I've seen it come full circle. I can remember post World War II when everything was made of metal, it was durable. And then starting with the forward brush man and woman, they started using plastic bristles on brushes instead of, boar's bristle. And you think about all the tons and hundreds of millions of tons of carbon, because every town had a smelter. I mean, they had foundries and, we used bunker fuel and coal, and this country was polluted and basically barren, from trees. So that box, we can't cut trees anymore, so where are you gonna get the product? Unless so plastics are part of our life now because they're durable and they keep improving it as far as strength. All your pipe is buried is plastic now, so 100 years from now, as it starts to break down, instead of lead in your water, you're gonna have plastic in it. So, we need to remember where we come from to understand where we need to go. Somewhere in between is the answer, but yeah.
Seems like the single-use stuff is where we need to focus.
I agree, yeah.
You know, if it's supposed to be durable, that's a different thing, but the package you just throw out as soon as you open it.
Yeah, well, maybe we should find a place to separately get rid of that stuff. So it can be set aside until we figure out what to do with it. Sorted out in your trash. Most people in Vermont would do it voluntarily. Put it someplace until we can find a way to break it down so it can be beneficial to us.
Someone was to talk about that for many years. It is harder and harder when you have single stream recycling, and so to keep, if you think of all that we send to the landfill, or much of what we send to the landfill as being resources that we might ultimately want to use again. That was a conversation we were having 30 years ago. If you didn't throw it all together, you could have, here's a pot of, glass or of plastic. So, Madam Chair, I could just, one more, you mentioned at the beginning, there are other solutions or proclaimed solutions out there that we would want to guard against. One of those chemical recycling, which is a It can kind of go by a number of different names, but we think of it as really a false kind of recycling for plastic. It is being promoted by the industry now, but we are seeing a number of problems. Very few of these facilities are up and running, certainly not running in any kind of efficient way, but it's a process that turns plastic into a fuel or fuel substitute for the general use of plastic in energy production. That can include gasification, pyrolysis, solvolysis, hydropyrolysis, and there are more here. And they say it's some sort of combustion process. Again, unlike glass or metal, plastics cannot be recycled indefinitely. There are technical limitations to doing so. And so ultimately, the majority of the plastics produced from the end products of these chemical recycling facilities will be discarded as problematic plastic wastes. Again, we have lots more information on this that we'd be happy to share, but this is, I don't think Vermont is a state that is likely to see anybody proposing the construction of a chemical recycling facility anytime soon. We don't have the transportation routes or the quantity of material that would probably make that worthwhile for them, but I think that it is something that we would prefer to say, we're just not going to do that. We're a better solution. Let's produce less. Let's have other steps that we try to take instead of a very, very high-tech solution that is fraught with problems and is hugely expensive. You know, that's kind of an alternative way to go. We're kind of saying, let's make it a lower tech thing, produce less, reuse and recycle more. So I'm happy, we will provide the committee with a number of links to studies and so forth on this, and I will be happy to answer any other questions that you may have.
Senator Fleck.
So just, share what you said, which is in the statement of purpose. The bill would also prohibit the chemical version of plastics in the state. But on page 5, I'm looking, any other process used to transform plastic or plastic derived materials into plastic monomers, et cetera, et cetera. Is that consistent with what's in the statement of purpose, or?
So that's, I mean, it isn't as far as I read it, but
Okay.
can you explain more what your thinking is?
Well, is any other process used to transform plastic or I mean, is that, I guess this would just prevent from just the chemical conversion.
That's right.
There are other things that you can, okay.
It would not prevent recycling of plastic, Senator, if that's
Okay.
kind of what you're wondering. I mean, we like recycling, you know, when you
Yeah.
can do that. It's just that there are technical challenges to recycling plastics. Any plastic in the state other than a 1 or a 2, if you think about those numbers inside the chasing arrows, it's very difficult to recycle those, difficult to find markets. And again, there are chemicals in those that make it difficult to find good market for. 1s and 2s, your PET or high density polyethylene, milk jugs or water bottles can be recycled successfully. But these other processes are much more high tech, using these technologies that suggest that they will make it's either a fuel or a process for recycling plastics that really has not been borne out. So
Right, and then some of the byproducts of those processes to achieve that are quite toxic.
quite toxic for sure.
Yes.
I heard, a friend of mine told me that they're finding microfibers, which are in, keep us warm, and they're finding that in, when you wash it, if it's in the water, right, as it breaks down, finding in plankton, which is one of the basic building blocks of life on this earth, and, all fish eat it. Which is pretty disturbing, but, can't go to the bottom.
Back into our range.
Yeah.
We found there was, as part of that study that we released in November, there's athletic wear, and just what you're talking about. So it's a kind of these are athletic wear for children, Adidas pants, sweatpants you might think of, and Vermont has a law that requires manufacturers of products sold to children to disclose to the health department a list of somewhere around 100 chemicals. If your product contains any one of those chemicals, you at least have to disclose it to the health department. And these Adidas athletic wear had at least 14 different toxic chemicals on the state's list of chemicals of high concern to children. And I don't wanna pick on Adidas, I'm sure it's Nike, I'm sure it's, all sorts of brands, it's this kind of plastic and material that release them into the wash and into our waterways. Every time we wash those pants, it was some incredible, thousands and thousands of microfibers that are released.
So that's my point, we don't produce any of that.
Right. No.
But we end up, we send it somewhere else to get manufactured, and then we buy it, and we end up buying those, it's like, so.
Thank you again.
Thank you.
Look forward to following up.
For sure. Okay, super. So before we adjourn for today, since we have all of us in the room at the moment, Senator Rogers, I just want to update you on on Senator Beck's amendments. Did you see that it is that he's gonna be making a proposal for the T-bill? Okay. Thought, since we did hear about it from Senator Beck, that we take a straw poll on this amendment.
Which amendment? There's
So the
two
one,
now. The
yeah,
one on
so
the
the
T-bill?
one for the T-bill.
And can I ask a question on Senator
Yes.
Beck? I just was looking at your 493, the one that you're gonna propose tomorrow on the budget bill.
On the budget, okay, yeah.
Does it still includes the transportation? Are you gonna do it in both amendments?
You're reading, right? Oh, I may have sent out the wrong one. No, it was not. Let me check on it. Are you looking at draft number 3.1?
2.1.
Sorry, it's 3.1.
Okay,
Which,
you wanna resend that?
Yeah, I can do it right now.
We're gonna hold off on a straw vote
On that one. Okay,
but just on the transportation.
got it, okay.
Just on the transportation one for now.
Okay.
Do you,
That's this one, 1.1.
yep, just
The
should be one,
transportation. Okay.
is this. Okay, so any other questions about this amendment for now? Okay, all right, all in favor, raise a hand or say aye.
all in favor? Yeah.
Okay, and all opposed? Okay, so when it comes up, we'll report back to the full. Okay, great.